off. Now, one of the communities that was dealt a devastating blow from the flooding was Garrett, Kentucky specifically, and that's where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel, which we'd like to get to this morning. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Jordan. A big difference this morning here in Garrett. This time yesterday, I would be standing in about 3 feet of water. These businesses were underwater, basically. They had a lot of water go inside. In fact, I can see the water line, which came up right here to the door. They started the cleanup yesterday about 7:30. They pulled some debris out. They tried to scrape the mud out, but they're going to have to replace the floor at these businesses here on what they call Front Street. Let me take you upstairs. Charles Peak was here with the drone and shows you the extent of the flooding. This is Beaver Creek, the right fork. It's now back in its banks, still flowing pretty swiftly. We were up on the bridge, and there's still some small debris and trash coming downstream, but it is now safely back in its banks after going way over its banks. We had 8 to 10 feet of water in the parking lot behind these buildings here in downtown Garrett. The highest level they've seen, the worst flooding they've seen since 1977 in these parts. And the governor, Andy Beshear, spoke to the flooding and what's going to be taking place down the road here in the state of Kentucky.
Our death toll is growing. By the end, we expect it will be in double digits. And a lot of families out there have lost absolutely everything. I want to thank all our first responders that are out there doing such heroic work. I know we've already airlifted between 20 and 30 people. Thank you to the National Guard and our Kentucky State Police that are doing that work.
We had about 30 people rescued here on boats yesterday. Nobody was up on a roof. They were basically on the lower level of their homes. Many of the homes had water into the first floor. Some didn't because they were built up on cinder blocks. Now, we do have a flood watch in a good deal of eastern and southeastern Kentucky until 10 p.m. tonight. Right now, the radar is virtually clear. We had some storms come over the area about 3 a.m. this morning, but they were quick movers, and rainfall amounts, as far as I could tell, nobody got even a half an inch of rain in the area. So that is good news. But we do have the forecast of more showers and thunderstorms today, about a 50-50 chance. Tomorrow, right now, here in Garrett, we're not forecasting any rain, Jordan, and then the return of some storms as we get into Sunday and Monday. So hopefully we've gotten past the worst of it. Now it's all about getting back into their homes and starting that long remediation process. The carpet comes out, the floors come out, the walls have to be taken out to at least as high as the water went. Jordan?
Well, Mike, we appreciate you being there for us and give us some perspective. I want to get it over to Kelly real quick because Kelly's got a great map here that really shows the bullseye of the rain events over the last couple.
Good morning from Garrett, Kentucky. I am meteorologist Mike Seidel. It's the day after a terrible flash flood setup right here in this town and across a lot of eastern and southeastern Kentucky. The flood watch continues here until 10 p.m. tonight. We're not out of the woods completely yet, but we did okay overnight. We had some storms roll through this area, through Hazard, through Pikeville, through Lexington, but the rainfall amounts were generally on the light side, and there were no issues except for one flash flood warning around Pikeville that has now expired. So it's going to be dry for most of today. You can see the water line caused by the flash flood up here. This is about 3.5 feet high. They were in here yesterday about 6, 7 o'clock trying to scrape out this mud. It's a vinyl floor, so they're going to have to pull that floor up. If it was hardwood, they could come in and kind of suck it out, but with the vinyl, they have to pour that out. Power is on, though. We were a little surprised this morning coming back into Garrett that the power is on across most of this area. This is Front Street, and this time yesterday I would be standing here and the water would be right about here. But yesterday afternoon and through the evening, the water just dropped very quickly. Now it's back in its banks. Take you back to yesterday quickly, and you can see what it looked like as we peaked up about 10 feet in the parking lot up to the top of a basketball goal, and they were rescuing residents. They rescued about 30 residents in this area. Nobody was up on a roof. Some folks stayed in their homes because they're up on cinder blocks. They have 2 stories. But now the process is to get back in, Jordan, and start that remediation, which means mold, mildew. You got to get in there, like take out the carpet, take out the floor, deal with the walls. So that's what they're looking at starting today. And
right.
It's just hot and steamy, so we're not going to get any dry air in here to help things out.
Might get a lot of restoration companies coming from out of state to help out too. Hey, Mike, real quick, you said the water level is about up to your belly button. Where does the water originate from where you're standing? Is it behind the camera view?
Oh my gosh. We'll take a quick walk. I think we have enough daylight. Just quickly, we'll walk down here and I'll show you, pardon my back, and we'll show you how far the water came. It was several hundred yards. I mean, this is quite the event. It was the highest the water's been since 1977. We'll look down the street here, and I'll show you the bridge, that blue bridge down there. The creek goes under that bridge, and it's well down below the bridge. It's maybe 3 or 4 feet deep right now. So the water was up above the bridge, and the water was all the way up to the railroad tracks where I'm standing here yesterday until mid-afternoon. So the water came all the way up to the railroad tracks. Now, in 1977, it actually went across the road. So quite the flood. We're happy the water has gotten back to where it belongs.
No, thanks for that perspective. That's so far from where it originated. That's really puts things into perspective for us. And going to the graphics now, kind of want to show you the crest here.
Good morning from Garrett, Kentucky. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel. Back here where they had a horrible flash flood yesterday, the worst they've seen in 45 years. The water was about waist deep right here. This is one of the businesses that's going to have to remediate. The water came right up to here. They were in here late yesterday before it got dark with mops and anything that could kind of sweep the mud out. But the floor is going to have to be replaced. Just a real mess in there when you bring in 2 to 3 feet of water that's filled with mud. Notice the church down here. We've got some vehicles up there. They put them up the higher ground. The water did not get up to the top, to the front door of the church. But the reason we have so many problems here in West Virginia and Kentucky where we are, the hills, the mountains, and all the water comes down the hillsides. This is one of those hills here. In fact, the Stratus deck is right down to the top, and you can see down there in the distance, looking over Highway 80, how low the deck of clouds is today. But all that water just comes downhill with gravity. And when you have training, it just rushes downhill, fills up these creeks and rivers. They rise rapidly, and as we mentioned earlier, they rescued about 30 folks from this town yesterday. No reports of anybody missing here. That's a good news, and the water has receded. Overnight, Jordan, we had just a little bit of rain, and we're looking pretty good right now as far as in the short term. And today, too, the chances of rain about 40 to 50%, but the flood watch continues until 10 p.m. tonight.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for the update. It's just crazy how fast the water can rise and then how fast it can kind of settle, too, as we see you are finally back on dry-ish ground. Hey, I want to talk high temps for a second.
We're back in Garrett, Kentucky. Good morning. The flash flood yesterday just covering the entire town here downtown. In fact, the water went all the way up to the railroad tracks. Now, in 1977, the previous flood that everybody remembers, it's that old, went over the tracks, over the berm, and across the road. So it wasn't quite that bad. It was bad enough because we had 8 to 10 feet of water in town. And even here on the leading edge of that wall of water, you can see how high the water got. This is about 3 feet in this auto supply business. They were in here yesterday trying to push some of the mud out. They're going to have to pull up the floor. It's a vinyl floor. It's not hardwood where you can kind of vacuum and suck out the mud. The power is on for most every place in the area. We're kind of surprised about that this morning. Let me take you back to yesterday. Charles Peak took his drone up, and you can see the expanse of the water. The water is back in its banks. It's the right fork of the Beaver Creek, and it's safely back at its banks. Still moving pretty quickly. Still some debris coming down the creek this morning, but it is certainly the water has evacuated this entire area. Yesterday afternoon, we could almost literally watch the water drop. As far as the forecast goes today, more storms are in the forecast. We were fortunate overnight that most areas of Kentucky and here avoided a flash flood warning. We did have one in the Pikeville area that's expired, and the radar this morning is pretty quiet. But there is a 50-50 chance of some more showers and thunderstorms this afternoon and this evening. Tomorrow, we're not forecasting any rain here in Garrett. Then the chance of storms returns on Sunday and Monday. So, Jordan, just a horrible situation overnight Wednesday night into Thursday morning with the training thunderstorms like we saw in St. Louis. And the rain comes down these mountainsides and hillsides and these creeks and streams. They just rapidly fill up and kind of catch the residents off guard. But fortunately here, 30 rescues, nobody unaccounted for at this point.
Which is an amazing statistic to kind of lead with there. Mike, thanks for the update. It's pretty amazing, the images we saw just yesterday compared to what he's showing us this morning. One of the communities that was dealt a devastating blow from the flooding is Garrett, Kentucky, and that's where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel. And you know, Mike, it's been really interesting to see where that water line went up to and where it currently is right now. Talk about night and day, such a drastic change.
Yeah, it's good to see the water gone, and you can see the asphalt and the roadways. I want to show you, speaking of water line, I want to show you how high the water got. Just a lot of mud here. But this house, right up here, what is that? That's about 9 feet. So Beaver Creek came way over its banks, up 9 feet. Let me show you the Charles Peak drone video, and basically he's over where we're standing here. We're on Back Street, and the water went all the way up to Front Street and almost to the railroad tracks. But you can see the video from aloft, and you get a sense of how much territory was covered. The creek is not very wide. We showed you that earlier. And right through here, that is the creek behind those trees. The water's, I mean, it's amazing how fast it came down. We were here yesterday through dinner time, and within a few hours, it was dropping at about a foot an hour. You could almost see it dropping. And that's what happens when we finally shut down the rainfall. But we had so much rain in this area, 8 to 12 inches across southeast Kentucky. Right now we're dry, but you can see very nice stratus, very low overcast this morning, shrouding the hills and mountains here in eastern Kentucky. No threat of rain in the short term. We may have a few showers and thunderstorms this afternoon, 50-50 chance. The flood watch continues until 10. Tomorrow, at this point, we're not forecasting any rain. The residents will likely come back today and start that remediation process. Obviously, water got into the first floor of some of these homes. Now, this one's fine on the first floor because it's built up. This one's also built up, but look at this. They probably have some issues because the water line, whoa, the mud is slippery, right up to here. So they probably had some water in the house. If they've got carpet or vinyl flooring, they're going to have to pull that out. So some of the houses are fine if they're high enough up, but many of these houses have water in the first floor. So Kelly, Jordan, it's nice to see the fact that it's not raining and the fact that we don't have a lot of rainfall in the forecast the next couple of days.
Yeah, that is good news. Give some time for that water to recede. It's amazing just how much damage all that water can do, even in the long term. All right, thanks so much, Mike.
We are back live here in Garrett, Kentucky, and the breaking news just out from Governor Andy Beshear just a few minutes ago saying the death toll now has risen to 15, so it's almost doubled. It was 8 earlier, now 15 fatalities from the historic flash flooding across much of southeastern and southern Kentucky. Here in Garrett, the highest the water's been in 45 years. We're on the one-lane bridge over the creek. This is the right fork of Beaver Creek. Still flowing, still wider than it should be, and there's still some debris, mostly just trash, running downstream. But I want to show you what happened yesterday. This time yesterday, the bridge was underwater, debris getting slammed up against the bridge. You can see these logs. There's some trash. And as we noted up on the Highway 80 bridge yesterday, we saw propane tanks, furniture going under the bridge and going down the creek. So this is Beaver Creek here. It's still wider than it should be, but get a sense of how far it went over its banks yesterday. The water has dropped based on the watermark 9 feet on the buildings, and it's already down into the creek. So it's dropped probably about, 13 or 14 feet. And I can show you the ball fields. These were all underwater yesterday. In the distance is the dugout, and the water was up to the top of the dugout there, just to the left of the playground. So just a sense of how much water was out here. This morning we look at the hillsides and mountainsides shrouded with the stratus clouds up here. Right now we've just had a few drops of rain. Nothing imminent as far as heavy rainfall. We may see some storms this afternoon, Jordan and Kelly, but for the meantime, it's the fact that residents are going to come back in here and start the cleanup process. Mentioned earlier, some of the homes up are on cinder blocks, and they're okay. Some, though, did take water into the first floors. Worst flooding here in 45 years. A lot of rain in a short period of time.
Hey, Mike, you might not know the answer to this question, but all that debris behind you that's stuck on the bridge, well, is that something like the logs and trees? Do they just push that back into the creek and the river, or do they actually collect it and bring it to the landfill?
Well, that's a good question. I would suspect they'll probably try to collect it because there's also trash in here. It's, you know, it's really troubling personally, but it's amazing how much trash came down the creek yesterday. And you see that, Jordan, you've seen that all over the place. Just trash everywhere. Anyway, that's a whole different topic for another day. But I think they're going to get these logs out of here. But we also have pieces of plastic. We got some shutters. And I would suspect, to answer your question, they'll get it out of here and not dump it back in the creek, because the creek's going to keep going down, and it's just going to end up on the banks.
And unfortunately, anytime we get a big weather event like this, you're right, Mike. I mean, there's so much trash and plastic that gets thrown up. Thanks for your live report. Want to show you Jackson.
And wow, that's here. That's where he's now. So let's go back out to Mike Seidel in Garrett, Kentucky. Mike, it's when you see the floodwaters recede, it's always so disturbing when you see how much was brought in those floodwaters and what people need to clean up. And the task of doing it just seems overwhelming.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what you would have to do, because you and I have covered these things, and you got to think about what they have to go through. I mean, you got mud everywhere. So once the water is gone, the water is gone now, but water, mud in these houses. Now, some of these houses, like this one right here behind this tree, you can see, we showed you this earlier. Yeah, another truck with some issues on the tailpipe. We showed you this house earlier, and the water was up 9 feet, but not into the house. Then you go over here, we've got another ranch house that's built up. That water got up to the deck, but the house here with the white fence, that water did get up about 4 or 5 inches to the first floor window. So no doubt water got into that house. So it's really a function of how high those houses are built up above ground level. But this is Beaver Creek, the right fork of Beaver Creek, highest it's been since April of 1977. That's over 45 years ago. And there's the one-lane bridge. We were showing you this yesterday. Where we were standing yesterday, the water was about 9 feet deep. We were up on the Highway 80 bridge. But look at the debris that just slammed into the bridge being collected. Then over on the other side, on the bank there, we've got just a lot of trash and wood there. Just, just everything comes downstream. Water is still flowing a pretty good clip, nothing like yesterday, and the creek is still a little wider than it should be. They rescued 30 folks here yesterday, and as far as we know, everybody is accounted for in this town in Garrett. We're about 45 minutes north and northeast of Hazard, Kentucky. So Jen and Reynolds, at least the water's down. We do still have a chance of some thunderstorms this afternoon. And as we go into tomorrow, we're not mentioning any rain. And as we get into Saturday and Sunday, those chances come back. More of a scattered variety, we think, versus that training that we had in St. Louis and here night before last into yesterday morning. Up to 12 inches of rain, some spots picking up 6 inches in 3 hours. And all the rain just comes down the hillsides and mountainsides. And that gravity and heavy rainfall, boy, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. No, Mike, I mean, look, and this is a story that we've been talking about. Are we concerned about the terrain in this area when you get heavy rainfall? And we're not done yet today. I mean, it may not be there, but we're still watching Western Virginia and West Virginia for some rain potential. So, Mike, thank you for being there. I mean, Mike really has been hustling. I don't know if you've been watching all around. He was in Lexington. He was in Charleston. And, just trying to get the story out to everyone watching.
Mike Seidel has been in Hindman, and wow, the floodwaters have receded, but boy, the memory lingers, and the long, hard road to recovery just getting started. Mike, I want to start with this. And you have covered a whole myriad of different severe weather events in your many years here at the Weather Channel. How would you categorize something like this, flash flooding? It has a distinctive, I don't want to say flavor to it, but boy, it's a little bit different than some of the other things you cover.
Yeah, when you talk about river flooding, usually that's a slow-moving disaster. The river just doesn't come up. Like, when you covered the Mississippi back in the late 90s. With flash flooding, it comes up and usually goes down pretty quickly. But in this case, with the mountains and hillsides and the tremendous amount of rainfall, up to a foot of rain in this area, it came up quickly, but it stayed up, and it came up extraordinarily high. We're in Garrett, highest the water's been in 45 years. This is, by all means, we're not making this up. This is Troublesome Creek here in downtown Hindman, and you can see how high the water was. In fact, yesterday morning, I would be just about underwater standing here, and you can see how far down the creek goes. Our photog, Rodney Hall, will pan down, and you can see a flipped car in the water down there. There's debris everywhere lining the side of the creek, and again, as the water came up, late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, there were evacuations. Unfortunately, most of the fatalities were here in this county, and 3 here in the town of Hindman itself. All these storefronts, this whole area, there's water in the building, so it's the remediation process here in downtown Hindman. Sun is out right now. Check the current radar. This is good because overnight last night we had some rain move through the area, but it was quick, short-lived. Only one flash flood warning over around Pikeville early this morning. Right now, though, no flash flood warnings in Kentucky or West Virginia, and nothing imminent here. It's just a warm, kind of humid mid to late summer afternoon. Now, tonight into the weekend, we will have a few showers and thunderstorms moving on through. We don't need any more rain, but we're not expecting the training aspect of the storms that we had, Jeff. They'll be more widely scattered, especially tomorrow into Sunday. It looks like the heavier rain on Sunday may be across Tennessee into Central Appalachia. But right now, it's all about cleanup, recovery, and mourning the loss of so many lives here in the state of Kentucky.
All right, thank you very much, Mike Seidel, live in Hindman, Kentucky. And indeed, we'll get back to Mike a little bit later.
Good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel in Hindman, Kentucky. We're not far from Hazard. We're in the southeastern part of the state. And of the 20 fatalities, 15 were right here in this county. Look at this. This is just one of the very strong visuals we've seen from the flash flooding. This car getting swept downstream and flipped over. Reminds me of the tremendous flooding we've seen around Ellicott City, Maryland, between Baltimore and Washington. I remember that day very vividly. It must have been 8 or 10 cars just flipped over all the way down as far as you can see. The water yesterday morning got way up here. You can see where I am on the bridge here in downtown Hindman. The debris, so the water was up about here. So you can see how much water rise there was all around here, mountains and hillsides. That's the problem here in eastern Kentucky, across West Virginia. You have the elevation, and you've got gravity and water, and then you have the training thunderstorms. So all that water rushes down the hillsides. We saw a rock slide that when we came over here this afternoon that almost got to the roadway, stuff that you would typically see out in California, say in Southern California. So fortunately, the water has come down. No big threat for heavy rain this afternoon, this evening, and tonight, but there are storms in the forecast for the next couple of days. And what we've noticed is as the water receded, it left behind a lot of mud. You can see the mud there in front of these businesses, and all these businesses are going to have to be remediated. Let's get the mud out, carpet, the flooring, and the drywall. So it's going to be a long cleanup recovery process, Jeff, as you know. And this time of the year, you don't get any help from the atmosphere because that dew point or that humidity is going to stay high for the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you so much, Mike Seidel. And again, we'll be back to Mike very soon. Some of that has subsided a bit, as we'll see in a moment. The Weather Channel's Mike Seidel is in Hindman right now, where the floodwaters, as I mentioned, have receded. But the long road to recovery is just getting started. And Mike, again, when you see devastation like this, it really is heart-rending, particularly when you think about the loss of life.
Yes, indeed. 15 of the 20 fatalities so far in the state of Kentucky here in Knott County. And the mayor told us 3 were right in the city of the Hindman area. I want to talk about the water and how high it got. Best I can tell, the water was about to the top of my head yesterday morning when they had this horrible flash flood. You're talking about 6, 10, 12 inches of rain falling over this watershed, and it comes down these mountains and hillsides. Now the water has backed way off, as you can see. Well, look what's in the foreground in Troublesome Creek. That's right, Troublesome Creek. We've got an SUV flipped over, not sure where it came from, but certainly it takes a lot of water to get a SUV off the road and into the creek. The other area impacted, certainly, some of the schools in the area. Hindman Elementary, take a look at the visuals here as we just have a mud-encased elementary school. The water was up to some of the students' desks. Just a real mess. And school's supposed to open in 2 weeks. I can't see how they can get this school open in 2 weeks. And we did get a chance earlier today to talk to the principal, and she talked about the impact and how the community is coming together.
Mud, lots of mud. You could see the water line. It's where it had been. I couldn't open the doors to my office. All of the stuff from my office was pushed forward. We stepped in some classrooms. You could see where the water had been over top of all of the students' desks. All of the carpets, bookshelves, books, everything was destroyed. The trophy case that usually sat in the front lobby was pushed out the back door. It had pushed the back doors open. People from across the community have been bringing trophies to us that they know belong to Hindman Elementary that they found along the road.
Well, that's quite the story. You find those trophies and you get them back to the school where they belong. A long road ahead for Hindman Elementary and for the town and for all of eastern and southeastern Kentucky because the remediation process takes a while. You've got water that's receded, but then you've got mud everywhere. even on the streets here, it's now turned to basically dust as everything has dried out. So, Jeff, just a real tragedy. Reminds me a little bit of Ellicott City. It rains so hard, it runs down the hillsides, and the water comes up rapidly. That's why we call it a flash flood. It also came down very quickly yesterday afternoon and last night.
All right, thanks so much. There's not a lot of time to react when you're in this kind of a situation. Thank you so much, Mike Seidel. Well, let's bring in our own Mike Seidel. He is live there in Kentucky. And Mike, just an epic flooding there like nobody's ever seen, at least in recorded history there in eastern Kentucky in some spots.
Yeah, exactly. Over in Garrett, we were there. Biggest flood they've had, worst flood since 77, 45 years. This is Troublesome Creek, so aptly named. Certainly what happened yesterday morning, the water got basically up to the top of the rail on the bridge. There's debris everywhere, but this is the most noticeable piece of debris. An SUV flipped over and landing on its roof at the bottom of the creek. So just imagine the force of the water, and also these road signs over here, these signs on the other side of the railing. Look how they got bent. These metal signs got bent and almost flattened. This is a speed limit sign, says speed limit 25. So it just gives you an idea of this water that came rushing down the hillsides and mountainsides. It funneled into Troublesome Creek, and the rest is history. Now it's all about remediation and cleaning up and keeping an eye on the radar. Right now, nothing imminent here, but there is still the chance of some storms here, especially as we get into Sunday and the early part of next week. Jeff, Dr. Knapp.
And that is where the Weather Channel's Mike Seidel has been stationed, where the floodwaters fortunately now have receded. But the long road to recovery, of course, is just getting started. And Mike, I was looking at some of those schools that were damaged. I can't see how they're going to be opening as they were supposed to in just a couple of weeks.
No, there's no way you can get that school open or the schools open with all that mud and all the remediation. It takes just a basic house, sometimes 2 or 3 months. So I think they're going to have to come up with a backup plan for those specific schools that got hit by the flooding. Many of the schools were left untouched. We're back here in Hindman, and we're here at Troublesome Creek. That's the name of the creek. And boy, yesterday morning, it just came out of its banks. In fact, it came up to about the top of the rail on the bridge. This is the Knott County Veterans Memorial Bridge. By the way, in Knott County, they had 15 of the 20 fatalities, including 6 children. So this is a hardest-hit county as far as loss of life. The creek, which is way up here, has really receded. We saw a lot of the water recede everywhere yesterday afternoon, last night, and overnight. But look in the bottom of the creek. That's a flipped over SUV. Have no idea where it was before the flood hit, but that's where it ended up, and they're going to have to pull that out. Just a lot of debris up and down the bank here of Troublesome Creek as the water rushed down the mountainsides. We had the training, much like we had in St. Louis, thunderstorms going over the same area for hours on end. Some spots got 6 inches of rain in 3 hours. You know, it's one thing if you're on level ground, say you're at the beach on a flat area, but it's another thing. You look around me, we've got hills and mountains. It's a beautiful part of the country, eastern Kentucky, the mountain state of West Virginia. So you deal with the rushing water down the hillsides, much like we see in Southern California and across the state of California when we see those mudslides and debris flows out in LA and those areas through, say, the Santa Monica Mountains. So the same kind of deal here. It's just not as prevalent. We actually saw our big rock slide coming over here earlier today from Garrett that got down near the road, but there was a lot of shoulder length. But it's rare to see that in this part of the country. You need a lot of water and a lot of force to bring down part of the hillside. So the cleanup underway, search and rescue crews continuing. There's still folks unaccounted for, but just historic flooding over in Garrett, the worst in 45 years. I checked, I couldn't find an active river gauge here, but you've got to think that it's easily the worst in at least 45 years, Jeff, if not longer, that the water has been this high in Hindman, Kentucky.
Just amazing scenes there, Mike. And
we are back live in Hindman, Kentucky, where they got hit hard yesterday morning. A treacherous flash flood. This is, believe it or not, Troublesome Creek, and the water came up here to the railing on the bridge here, this Veterans Memorial Bridge. So you can imagine how much rainfall it takes. What you also have to realize that all the water comes on these hillsides and mountainsides and that gets funneled. It's not like we're in a flat area. It just comes down the hillsides, and this creek just went nuts. And it happened very quickly, caught a lot of folks off guard. And unfortunately, out of the 20 fatalities so far in Kentucky, 15 were here in Knott County. That's the county where we are, Hindman. Look down in the creek, though. This is reminiscent of Ellicott City's flood several years ago, where we were over there the next day, and there was probably 8, 10, 12 cars up and down the Patapsco. And this car, this is an SUV, flipped over and sitting in the water. They're going to have to pull that out. There's debris everywhere. And notice these road signs, speed limit sign, bridge sign, directional signs, the force of the water just bending them over. And remember, the water was about to here. So you can get an idea of how fast the water was going that way to bend this sign almost down to the ground. So the power of water, we talk about it all the time, and it's especially true when you deal with elevated areas like here and like, as we see often, when they do have a winter season in California. Back to you, Jeff. Dr. Knapp.
Yeah, wherever there is too much rain in a short period of time, you have some major problems.